Hey everybody, Gormals here with another War Thunder video. And this time I want to take a look at another BF-109, the G-14, which many people have asked for. So let's talk quickly about this version of the BF-109 before we take a look at a few fights in the plane. Now, since I have made a few BF-109 videos before, I won't go into too much detail. Now, the G-14, unlike its name would suggest, did not come after the G-10. The G-14 came after the G-6 and was created to incorporate all the different improvements and changes that were made to the G-6 over its service life into one plane. So that is what the G-14 is for the most part, a standardized G-6. The G-14 was the first BF-109 which came with the MW50 injection as standard. Some G6 versions were retrofitted with MW50, and the G6 we have in War Thunder does have MW50 injection as well, so the engine power is similar on War Emergency Power. Now, the G14 also has the new canopy with improved visibility to the rear, also known as the Erlerhaube. Some late production G6 also had those, but the G6 we have in game does not, so that is an easy way to keep the two apart. Overall, the plane should be very similar in overall performance and effectiveness than the G6 we have in game, and they are very similar. But the G14 is of course known to have a newer flight model with a few improvements and just feels a bit better and a little bit more realistic than, for example, the BF-109 G10, even though I still like the G10 too. Now, in comparison with the F4 I flew last time, the G14 has of course gained quite a bit of weight thanks to structural improvements, better armor protection, a slightly bigger engine and of course the MW50 injection, so the plane won't turn as well. However, many of the opposing planes also gained weight, and in comparison to many of them, especially on the Allied side, the G14 is still very light. And with its MW50 injection, the DB605 engine can put out 1800 horsepower, giving the plane a very good power-to-weight ratio. And as is usually the case with the BF-109s, that is the plane's trump card in many situations, making the plane an excellent energy fighter and very good in vertical maneuvering. Now, armament-wise, the plane has the armament as it was introduced with the BF-109 G6. Two 13mm heavy machine guns in the engine cowling and a cannon, either a 20mm MG151 or a 30mm Mark 108, firing through the propeller hub. That gives the plane a very decent armament. As for the cannon choice, many prefer the 20mm cannon with its larger ammo supply and higher rate of fire and muzzle velocity. I am an exception here. I personally prefer the Mark 108 with its greater hitting power, as one hit from the 30mm Minengeschosse is usually enough to take a fighter out of the game. So I changed to the Mark 108 as soon as I had the option unlocked, and it is what I use in the fights I want to show you. And well, that's a basic overview of the plane. Let's take a look at some action in it. So this fight takes place on the Battle for Bastogne map. I come into the game a little late via the join in progress and make my way towards the middle of the map, where I could see a few planes flying around. As I get closer, I can identify a friendly TOW 217 which is under attack by at least two enemy planes, and I hope I can get there in time to help the friendly. The TOW T-17 turns and comes my way, and I hope I can get a shot at the pursuers, but I don't have a good angle, so I pull up and come around in the high yo-yo turn to slot in behind the enemy planes following the friendly. As I come back down, I can only see the Typhoon. And I fire two quick bursts taking the Typhoon out, and then I go up maneuvering a bit to make a more difficult target, looking for the second plane I saw behind the TOW 17. Sadly, I was a bit too late and the TOW 17 goes down as well. But there are still a few enemy planes around I have to look out for, and as I look around I can see two planes behind me, one of them enemy, and I start to turn towards them, but when I do so, a Tempest flies past me, so I go after this one, since he must have seen me and I assume he would turn around to attack if I don't put some pressure on him. Now, the Tempest is faster than me in a straight line or in a dive, so eventually he would outrun me, but at the moment it seems I am at a higher energy state and I was above the Tempest as it flew past me, so I can build up a little bit of speed descending after the Tempest, and I am faster at the moment. I am also aided by the fact that the Tempest is apparently climbing a bit, which helps me out, since my lighter plane, which does have a better power-to-weight ratio than a Tempest, does better in a sustained climb than the Tempest, so I can slowly close the distance. The Tempest starts to turn to the left, and as I close in tightens up the turn and descends while turning. Now the Tempest, while heavier, also has a huge wing and therefore a lower wing loading than my 109, so the Tempest will turn a bit better. No reason to try to follow the better turning plane in his descending turn. Instead I go up, climb above the Tempest, and then do a wing over and dive back towards it. It looked at first like he might want to go for a head-on, so I pull up again, but the Tempest turned to the left instead, so I come back down to slot in behind it. As the Tempest then turns to the right, I go up in a high yo-yo turn to counter my worst turn rate and take advantage of my power-to-weight ratio, and gained enough of an advantage to gain enough lead to fire a burst. I get a hit, but sadly only with the machine guns, and I don't do much damage. And then I roll around for another attack, but the Tempest now starts to dive away, and here the Tempest is simply faster than I am. The Tempest builds up a bit of speed in his shallow dive, and then the overall higher horsepower of the Tempest does its job, and the Tempest slowly pulls away. Now I fire a few machine gun bursts after it, hoping for a lucky hit and maybe to get the Tempest to do evasive maneuvers that would let me catch up to it. But I don't hit, and the Tempest is increasing the distance. I don't want to get dragged and caught by another enemy plane while chasing the Tempest I can't catch. So after a while I turn around and head back to the fight, while keeping an eye on the Tempest to see if he takes this opportunity to go on the offensive again. But he doesn't. Shortly after that a Focke-Wulf 490 calls for help, and I make my way towards those coordinates. I can't find the Focke-Wulf 490 that called for assistance, but I do find another Focke-Wulf 490 as well as a Spitfire. I pull up above them and then dive towards the Spitfire as it turns after the Focke-Wulf 490. I come down in front of the Spitfire, and as I do so I line up the flight path of the Spitfire and fire a burst, and the Spitfire flies through the burst and I get a hit, and this time it's a cannon hit as well, and while I pull back up I can see that the Spitfire is going down. But the Focke-Wulf 490 that initially called for help in this area reported more enemy planes than just one, so there are probably more around. And indeed, as I pull up and look around, I can soon spot tracer fire in two more planes close by. As I close in I can see that it is a BF-109 and it is attacking a Spitfire. The Spitfire starts to take evasive action, and the BF-109 tries to turn after the Spit to get back into fire position. The Spitfire, however, knows what he is doing and provides a nice example of why you don't turn after a Spitfire in a 109. He uses his better turn rate to go into a few wide barrel rolls coming in behind the BF-109. I try to get a shot as I come down, but I wait a bit too long and I can't quite get enough lead to fire. So I go back up and keep an eye on the Spitfire, and as he is still focused on the 109, I dive back towards him for a second attack. The Spitfire turns hard to evade another 109, and I line up his flight path, but sadly aim a little bit too low and miss again, and I have to go up again, since again you really don't want to turn after a Mark 9 in your G-14. By now more enemy planes have shown up, but mostly on lower altitude. I dive towards what looks like another Mark 9 as a Griffin Spitfire passes me, and I focus on him, as I at first assume he would go after me. So I go back up to get above him, but the Griffin does not go after me, but instead goes back down after a second BF-109, so I come around and go after him. The Griffin Spitfire overshoots the BF-109 and I get a good opportunity to fire a shot, and this time I get a good hit with the cannon, and it seems the Spitfire goes down. And I go back up to loop around and attack again. I at first want to go after the Spitfires, which are on lower altitude after the second 109, but then I see another Spitfire coming up closer to me and I decide to go after that one first. In hindsight maybe the wrong decision, but at the time I feared he would be able to get behind me if I go after the Spitfires on the deck, and I hoped I would be able to get behind this one fast. The Spitfire spots me, however, and starts to turn, so I have to go back up again to fight the Spitfire, another LF Mark 9 it seems, in the vertical. As I loop around, the Spitfire pulls up into me and we end up in a head-on situation, so as I come down I pull up again to go back around again, hoping to eventually gain an energy advantage over the Spitfire. Now, the LF Mark 9 is probably the worst Spitfire to energy fight, since it is lighter than the later Griffin Spitfires, but still puts out about 200 horsepower at sea level, giving it the best power-to-weight ratio of any Spitfire in the game. The good turn rate still often works against the Spitfire in such a fight if the pilot is less experienced, since the good turn rate also allows the pilot to waste lots of speed and energy very fast, but this is not the case here. So the fight is pretty even and a slow affair, as I go up and then come down at the Spitfire and pull up again before we are in a real head-on, hoping to slowly gain an advantage over the Spitfire and to eventually get an opportunity to fire at it. And eventually, after a few loops and almost head-ons like this, I do get a bit higher and my nose on the Spitfire a bit sooner than in the previous loops. So I see an opportunity the next time I come down for an attack, and I want to fire when the Spitfire passes below me. But the Spitfire presses the stick down at the last moment and passes above me instead of below me, and I miss my shots. I also stall the plane as I pull up, which costs me a bit of energy too, so I should have avoided the next head-on again, as the energy after my little stall is more equal again, giving the Spitfire an opportunity to fire as well. But luckily it missed and I got a hit, but only machine guns again. The Spitfire does start trailing smoke, losing coolant, and I hope I might have hit the engine. Now, the problem with fights taking this long is though that it gives other planes lots of opportunity to get in fire position unnoticed, so sadly I missed another Spitfire closing in, and as I go back down to attack again I take a hit and my plane goes down. So this was it for the first battle I wanted to show you. I thought the fight versus the Spitfire was quite interesting. Well, let's take a look at another battle in the Bf-109 G-14. This one takes place on the Aurora map, and as usual I move towards the objective in the middle of the map, though this time I did not join in progress but at the start, so I have a bit more time and I'm already past the main objective in the middle when I spot the fighter on a slightly lower altitude, first coming my way but then turning around and apparently going after a friendly bomber which is on its way to a bombing point. So I dive after the plane, which turns out to be a Typhoon. The Typhoon stops climbing after the bomber and descends a bit, but I don't think he has spotted me, and I fire a burst after the enemy plane and get a hit with the 30mm cannon, which finishes the Typhoon off. And then I pull up to regain some altitude, and as usual after an attack check my rear in case someone else got behind me while I was focused on the Typhoon. Now, as I have said, I'm already past the middle of the map, so I turn around to get back to the main objective, though coming from the opposite side I would usually come from, which I hope gives me a bit of an advantage and maybe allows me to surprise another enemy plane. I do spot another plane pretty quickly coming my way, and I go there to take a look, but from where he is coming I am pretty sure he is friendly. And it turns out to be a Bf-109 G6. However, as I look at G6 and pull up again, I can see anti-aircraft fire and at least two planes in that direction, but quite a bit lower, so I turn around again and go there. I'm not sure if the AA fire is friendly and shooting on an enemy or enemy and shooting at the friendly, but the two planes looked like they were maneuvering against each other, so I assume at least one of them is enemy. At first I have trouble identifying the plane I'm moving towards with the cloud being in the way, but when I can finally make out the plane it turns out to be another Typhoon crossing my flight path at a right angle. And I go up and roll in behind him. I started to maneuver a little late, so I don't come down directly behind him, but close enough. And I am much faster since I came down from altitude, and I close in fast. The Typhoon is focused on a Bf-109 in front of him and not noticing my approach, and as I get close enough I fire a few rounds and get a cannon hit that sets the Typhoon on fire, and he is going down, while I climb back up looking for other threats. I start to go up in a loop, but then I can see a plane pass below me as I come around, and I get ready to go after it should it be another enemy plane. But it turns out to be friendly, most likely the Bf-109 from earlier, the one the Typhoon was after. However, there are still a lot of AA fire as well as planes in front of me as I level out, this time on slightly higher altitude in the clouds. So this is where I go to see if a friendly plane needs some help. As I get closer though, it turns out most of the planes are friendly. The AAA fire is also friendly and firing on an enemy plane nearby, a Spitfire by the looks of it. But this one is already spinning and going down. Now I keep an eye on it in case it comes out of the spin eventually, and it looks like it does for a second, but then it goes back into the spin and does not get out, at least till I lose sight of the plane, and eventually a Bf-109 comes in and finishes the Spitfire off. I am now above most of the friendlies in this area, and as I see two planes pass below me, I dive down since I'm not sure if both of them friendly, but they are. Now as I pass the spinning Spitfire though as it goes down, I can see some more tracer fire behind it, all the way on the deck. So I head there. The tracers were German and the two planes seem to be in a fight. And I want to help the friendly plane. As I get close enough to identify the planes, I can see that it is a Mark 9 Spitfire and another Bf-109 fighting. I come in at pretty high speed as I attack the Spitfire, but I can't get quite enough lead to fire on my first pass, and I go back up again in a wide loop while keeping an eye on the Spitfire. Since my speed was pretty high when I pulled up from my dive, I get pretty far above the Spitfire and then come around to dive back down on it on a second attack. This time I have a much better shot at it, but the 109 and the Spitfire go into a head-on and collide before I can get there. So I go up again. Now I can see some AA fire and it is getting closer, and since this should be friendly AA, there has to be another enemy plane. I come around and try to spot it, but I only do so when I see the tracers of the attacking plane, and I roll out of the way a bit and ask for assistance, and then go back up in a loop and look around. Looking back I can see two enemy planes. And I come around and dive back towards them, since I ended up on a slightly higher altitude than them. One enemy plane moved to the right and the other one to the left. At first I hope I can get the one that moved away to the right, but I notice I can't get there in time and I saw the second one go to my left. The one that came around from the left is a Spitfire, but I'm on a higher energy level and I go up above the Spitfire and do a wing over and dive back towards it. The Spitfire turns into me and I pull back up again, and a Typhoon meanwhile shows up from my right. I go up and the Typhoon turns back towards me, but on lower altitude, and the Spitfire is now focused on someone else and already under attack by two other planes, so I go after the Typhoon, which does not seem to have a plane behind it at the moment. I line up the Typhoon as it turns towards me again and fire a burst, but my nose bounces up a bit and I miss, so I do a high yo-yo turn and go after the Typhoon again. I level out behind the Typhoon to go for another attack, and since I'm on a higher energy level I can close in and get ready to fire pretty quickly. The Typhoon pushes its nose down as I get ready to fire and it gets out of my sights for a second, but ends up inverted and I get back on target and fire two bursts. With the second one I get a hit with the cannon which takes the Typhoon out. I pull up and look around and I can see more planes to my left, and I do a high yo-yo and turn towards them. I'm too late to help a Bf-109 that is already going down, but I can see two Spitfires, one on slightly higher altitude than the other, and I go after the higher one. The Spitfire has not noticed me and I'm faster at this point, so I can close in and fire. I get a hit, but only with machine guns, and my second burst misses. Now the Spitfire turns to the left and descends, and I pull up a bit and look down on the Spitfire to get ready for another attack. But I can see a Bf-109 passing below me going the other direction and the Typhoon behind it, so I go after the Typhoon that is attacking the Bf-109 instead. I am again faster than the Typhoon and I can close in on it pretty fast as the Typhoon attacks the Bf-109, but I'm at this point almost out of cannon ammo, so when I do open fire I am soon down to machine guns only. But thankfully the 30mm machine guns are not that bad and they do the job. The Typhoon eventually starts to trail smoke and goes down. Now with my cannon ammo gone I start to head back to base and cool down my engine while I am at it. Now after heading back to base and rearming at the small auxiliary airfield, I come back looking for where the fight is. I again pass over the middle of the map and approach the small enemy auxiliary airfield, and I can see a few planes above it, and to me it looks like two of them might be fighting, with one of them constantly trying to get behind the other one. As I get closer though it turns out I was wrong. They are both Griffin Spitfires, apparently flying in formation. Since I hope they have not seen me yet, I try to go after them and get one of them before they notice me, but the AA gives away my approach and the Spitfires turn around. Now I am over the enemy airfield, and on top of the two Griffins I saw at least one more enemy plane here. I don't know what they are doing here, but I don't want to fight them here all, so I point my nose down a little bit and dive away from them. Now the Spitfires lost a bit of speed when they turned around, and my Bf-109 builds up speed in the dive quite well, so unless I turn they won't catch me anytime soon. but looking back I can see that the two Griffins and at least one other plane are following me, so I might as well go for a good old drag. So I ask for assistance to give my team my position and just continue straight for a bit while keeping an eye on the enemy planes behind me. Looking back, I think I could see one more dot than I saw before, and I go into a slight turn so that the distance doesn't get too great and the Spitfires lose interest, and also to maybe move the fight over the city to get AA support from friendly ground units, which makes it easier for friendly planes to see where the fight is. The next time I look back though, I'm sure I can see two new planes moving in on the three I saw earlier. I'm not entirely sure if they are all friendly, but I assume they are, so I get ready to turn around and get into the mix myself. I call for assistance one more time in case this turns into a larger fight to give the position to friendlies, and then I start to pull up to turn around. The two Spitfires turn towards me again and start to climb up to me while I dive down on them. I turn out of the way before we are in a head-on and use the speed I built up diving towards them to go up again. Meanwhile, a Focke-Wulf 490 finishes off the third enemy that was behind those two, a Seafire. I turn towards the Spitfires again, and one of them is attacking me, but already under attack himself by a Bf 109, and the other one is breaking off and diving away. So instead of going up again, I go after the one that was diving away. And when he pulls up again, I line up his flight path and pull the trigger, and the Spitfire flies through my fire and a 30mm round takes off his wing. The other Spitfire is meanwhile finished off by the 109. Well, and those are the three enemies I saw over the airfield taken care of. And there aren't many enemy planes left. A Focke-Wulf 490 finds one of them and gives his position shortly after, so I move there and find the enemy plane, a Typhoon, chased by said Focke-Wulf 490. With the 190 already behind the Typhoon, I won't go after it myself, so that we don't have two planes focusing on the same target. Instead I go into a spiral climb over the two and keep an eye on them, so I can move in should more enemy planes show up or the Typhoon get the upper hand. As the Typhoon pulls up a bit in his turn and climbs a bit, I think about taking a quick snapshot, but I don't get a good angle and I don't want to fly into anyone's line of fire, so I pull back up and go back to circling the fight. By now more friendly planes arrived as well. As I climb and look back down, I can eventually see another new plane arriving, and this one is enemy, another Typhoon, so I dive down to get behind the newcomer. The Typhoon pulls up after its attack run, and I level out behind it, and fire a burst at close range. The first one misses, but the second hits and finishes the Typhoon off. So with this Typhoon taken care of, I climb back up and then look around for the other Typhoon, which I have lost sight on while attacking the newcomer, but I can soon spot it again, and this Typhoon is still under attack by Bf 109 and shot down shortly after by it. Well, and that leaves only one plane on the enemy team, and that one is also soon attacked and finished off by another 109. So this is it for this fight. I thought this one shows the capabilities of the plane and also is again an example for good team play in random teams. So a few thoughts on the G-14. Well, it is a Bf 109, so not surprisingly I like it. The good power to weight ratio and lightweight make it a great energy fighter, and it climbs like a rocket too. The plane is also maneuverable, but of course it will meet many opponents that have a far lower wing loading and do turn much better, especially Spitfires of course. The Alive Mark 9 is on the same battle rating and you will meet it a lot. Here it is really important not to try to turn after them. If you try to turn after a Mark 9 in a G-14 or any higher rank Bf 109 for that matter, and the pilot in a Mark 9 knows his business, you will lose, simple as that, even if you start behind the Mark 9. The Bf 109 is great in the vertical and this trait should be used as much as possible. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.